Welcome. Today we have Terry Saber with us. She's the principal and owner of the Saber Advisory Group. Terry has more than 35 years experience in working with financial institutions in strategic planning, human capital, and executive coaching. Additionally, Terry is the program coordinator for the Human Resources School at the Graduate School of Banking at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. Terry, welcome, and thank you for spending some time today with today's Banker Digest.
Good morning, Larry. It's great to be here, and it's always exciting and invigorating to me to talk about all things GSB.
Great. Good. All right. Great programs. So there is so much we could talk about. I'd like to focus our conversation on the current HR challenges facing banks. We find ourselves in a very interesting time with the multiple challenges of one, increased customer expectations, two, the shift from branch banking to technology-based banking, and three, the challenges in workforce demographics. So Terry, how do you view these trends and challenges?
Well, thank you, Larry. Great question, and certainly a current one. It does seem trite a bit to say that our industry is in a time of unprecedented change, but we indeed are. And those of us who have the decades, multiple decades, as you indicated, of experience in this industry, really understand that given all the change we've been through today is unprecedented. And many community banks understand that. Many of the bankers who come through the GSB schools understand that. Unfortunately, some, on the other hand, do not. And the trends and challenges should be no surprise. We've been reading about them and preparing for them for decades. But in my professional opinion, there are really four key trends and challenges that community banks, need to be very aware of and focused on. The first one, of course, is the workforce. Now, back in the 90s, those of us who predate ourselves, Workforce 2020 was published and warned us, if you will, of the effect of the shift in demographics and what that would mean to the workforce, what it would mean to society in general.
Right.
And then it was updated with Workforce 2010, further updated to Workforce 2020, and here we are living in it, 2021, compounded by a pandemic that none of us could have anticipated that went on. So we do have fewer people, point blank, to fill the workforce need, compounded by our country's challenges with immigration. The baby boomers simply had fewer children than our aging traditionalist parents, and Gen X married much later, if at all, and have had fewer children, if any. And so that's the first thing. Secondly, in the early days of my career, pre-banking, I taught high school prep classes. And in the ensuing decades, as a result of that, I have followed closely the trends of our public education system. And in several ways, it has not been a pretty picture. So you compound the challenges of the shifting demographics and the shortage of available workers. You also have skill-based learning that has declined. So workers enter the workforce less prepared than in prior generations. So the training and development and the ensuing budgets that have to occur, have fallen more on the workplace. That's the second thing. The third thing is obviously automation and digitization have escalated, propelled, if you will, even faster by this pandemic. All of a sudden, overnight, customers became willing and acclimated to do their banking business virtually, digitally, online. And banks, to their credit, pivoted to that need faster than most of them would have believed, quite frankly, they could or they would. Bank lobbies have been virtually empty for 10 years, more so today. And while the branch is not obsolete, it needs to evolve to something smaller, more consultative, and more strategic. Lastly, the remote work trend, fueled by the pandemic, has forced banks to rethink culture, to rethink teams, and to rethink communication. So those, to me, would be the primary challenges we absolutely have to help community banks be focused on, especially those who want to stay in the game.
Right, right. Well, thank you, Terry. These are, the four things you identify. They're really steep challenges. So, with that as a backdrop, how does the HR management school at GSB help bankers identify and understand and address these challenges?
Great question. First of all, I think it's well known, but it bears repeating. The Graduate School of Banking's Human Resource Management School is unique in that a portion of that curriculum is exclusively devoted to helping HR leaders better understand the business of banking. So if I want to have a seat at the table, if I as an HR leader want to be a strategic partner, I need to understand key ratio analysis, balance sheet, P&L basics, the language of banking. Bankers have language all their own: ROE, ROA, NIM, efficiency ratio, quarterly. And they need, and the Graduate School of Banking's HR school helps apply those metrics to the, as we call it, people portfolio, or as we say at the other, asset portfolio. So that's one thing. Another portion of the curriculum is devoted to the HR metrics. So quantifying this people portfolio to the bottom line. And the linkage of both of these, the bank metrics and the HR metrics, really become the tools and the measuring sticks for banks' reward systems, not the least of which would be annual incentive compensation, merit pay, long-term incentives, or equity portions. It's all linked. So that's one key way.
Right.
Secondly, the HR management school curriculum is updated annually. It is never stagnant. And it begins with a strategy assessment that HR leaders do on their banks before they come to the school. So we as instructors really have a good handle, really by asset size, on whether or not some of these leaders coming in are coming from banks that are really focused on the strategies that they should be focused on. So topics are very current. The students really know where they are from a strategy assessment. And then I would say it really gives the instructors a gauge on whether these leaders and the banks themselves are in tune with those topics and challenges that we talked about. And then lastly, it is designed in a way that allows for a lot of interaction, a lot of group work, a lot of networking, a lot of peer group analysis. And that's all mixed up by geography, asset size, key issues and challenges that these leaders have that they think are, relatively sort of high priority. And in essence, at the end of the week, these HR leaders have really become their own peer group, or have sort of culled out of the class a peer group that they want to stay in touch with. And so now they have resources. What is your bank doing about this? And how is your bank? Why is our bank performing this way and your bank is performing this way? What are you doing differently? So I would say three very key things, and very timely and up to date.
Right. Terry, sounds like a great program. I really like the pre-course work to understand what my bank's strategy is, and come into the program that of course helps to identify some potential gaps, from an HR perspective, from a strategic perspective. So that's great. Thank you. So let's shift to a little more of a strategic, kind of an upstairs kind of perspective. So Terry, what do you see as the key HR challenges that you would advise the bank's senior executives to be addressing?
Well, another great question, Larry. In addition to my work leading the curriculum of the HR school, I think you and I have talked in the past. I also lead the leadership and management and executive leadership certification at the Graduate School of Banking's 2-week school in August every year. And of course, this is the school that bankers send their executives or their successor to be executives to. And 40% of that 2-week August curriculum is devoted to leadership and leadership development and strategy and all of the HR pieces. It's interesting to me that when bankers go through that school, lots of times they're coming up traditionally through the commercial banking rank, but they're ultimately the executives or the CEOs. And having taught there as long as I have, I love it when, they become the CEO and then they reach out and they say, that stuff you talked about at GSB, I thought it was the soft stuff, but now it's the stuff I use every day. And it's the stuff that really makes a difference. And so you can high five them and then you can say, too bad you didn't understand that a little earlier, but nevertheless. So with that in mind, what do executives need to be addressing? And Larry, if you saw as many strategic plans of community banks as I do, you would be amazed at how, if you do a traditional, some people get the gag reflex when you talk about a SWOT analysis with strategic planning, but it's real. And so, when you look at the strengths and the weaknesses within community banks and they look at it, lots of times it's these people issues that show up as, the areas that we need to most improve. So to your question, what do we need to either begin addressing or address in a much deeper way? Number one, no question, succession and talent management. Holistically, identifying high potential, high performing talent, ensuring the reward systems are competitive. And nowadays, more than ever, banks have to find a way to link them in, to get them to think and act like shareholders. And that, of course, is best done when they are thinking about what sort of equity stake, real or perceived, can these leaders of today and tomorrow, what can we provide? And then stay interviews, of course, are critical, but understanding where the talent and succession gaps are and how you're going to fill those, and being much more strategic about how you put together a learning and development budget. That would be the first thing. Secondly, remote work strategies are here to stay. And it links to the one that I just talked about, because really the hypos, as we call them, or the high potential, high performing people are now much more aware than they ever were that they have options. And they're also aware that they can really live wherever they want to and exercise some of those options. Not that they all do or will, about remote work strategies. And I'm not suggesting that community banks have to have remote work strategies for everyone, but I am suggesting they need to get serious about what motivates these talented people they want to retain and figure out new and creative and innovative ways to think about that. That's the second thing. The third thing is customers are no longer 9 to 5. It is not a 9 to 5 world. And so investing in the increasingly sophisticated digital strategies, that includes chat, it includes contact centers, it includes sophisticated apps, it includes fintech alliances and partnerships. We've got to get very serious about that. And the challenge for community banks is, they would say, some of them, well, we're not the big regional players. We're not a Wells Fargo. We're not, we don't have that. They don't have a choice. I mean, they need to figure out with the niche that is the new community. Niche, by the way, as several great people in the banking industry would say, is the new community. It's not so much geographic. So we've got to get much more strategic and about how we think about that. And lastly, then that leads right into the fourth thing, which would be banking the next generation of customers. I mean, millennials are the key, and social media is their link, as well as, sophisticated apps that they're using, many of them multiple times a day. And so investing in the technology that helps a community bank understand their current customer base, the age of that customer base, and then, being able to interact with that customer base like you and I do every day with Amazon, wherever it is that we shop. I mean, they know what we're looking for. They know what our preferences are. And every day there are things in our mailboxes, telling us, the next best thing we ought to be thinking about. And banks have to get a lot more sophisticated with that. And quite frankly, the talent piece that I mentioned at the beginning in succession, combined with this massive escalating trend to digitization
Right.
is what's causing a lot of the consolidation. Either there
Yes.
are no successors, or we haven't groomed them in time, or we just don't have the means to invest in the technology. We have aging shareholders, and that's fueling the uptick now again in consolidation. So, it goes back to the strategic question of what's the game plan? What's the future game plan of the bank? And, how long are your shareholders going to stick with you? And what's the age of those shareholders? And what are their expectations? And therefore,
Right.
this next generation of leaders, what is it that you have to be able to produce from a net income standpoint to be able, to still satisfy these shareholders? And that's where it all comes back to strategy.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. It does come back to strategy. Interesting insight that the most current aspect of scale is the technology and people. Just there's always something with scale that's challenging, and maybe it's those. So Terry, thank you for your insights on the HR trends, and how the Graduate School of Banking and HR Management School can help bankers become better prepared to lead their financial institutions. So in closing, thank you for joining today's Banker Digest. If you have additional questions for Terry, please see the links in her bio.